Now to a story you'll see only on 8. The debate over women's rights in the General Assembly sparked several protests at the Capitol this year, and protesters were met with heavy police presence. We wanted to know how much all of that security cost you. 8 News anchor Carrie O'Brien investigates.
It's hard to forget images like this. The state police SWAT team armed with weapons, hiding in the bushes at the governor's mansion during a candlelight vigil for women's rights.
They had like commandos in the bushes. I felt like I was in platoon or something.
They had a tank and officers dressed in tactical military type gear with assault rifles.
Before that, there was this scene. Capitol Police on the ground circling this silent protest, while state police hover overhead in a helicopter. And protesters say they'll never forget this. Police arresting more than 30 people for sitting on the Capitol steps. They were supported by officers in riot gear.
It was the presence of force to try and scare us away from the issue.
Tactical teams, armored cars, and helicopters. It's the kind of force you see during a standoff. State lawmakers like Delegate David Toscano were troubled by the images.
The appearance of this was that it looked excessive.
8 News did some digging, and guess what? All this extra security cost you, the taxpayer. Records we obtained from state police show the overtime pay alone cost nearly $22,000. In addition to that, state police officers racked up more than 332 hours in comp time, a cost of almost $8,000. The grand total, nearly $30,000 to secure 3 rallies at a time when budgets are tight here in the Commonwealth.
$30,000 that's someone's salary. That's me going to grad school.
We shared our findings with protest organizers and state lawmakers.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's absolutely absurd, especially in these tough times when people need jobs, people need health care, people need help just getting by and surviving.
You want to talk about health care, you want to talk about infrastructure, you want to talk about transportation. I mean, I can think of a million ways in which $30,000 could be better spent.
Delegate Toscano says he can see using this kind of security if there was a legitimate threat.
If there was some reliable intelligence that gave people some cause for concern that this was going to be very, very disruptive, it makes sense to spend the money on the overtime to protect folks.
But he says this didn't appear to be a troublesome crowd.
When you take a look at the folks who were out there demonstrating, many middle-aged women who didn't seem to have much violence on their mind, you wonder whether this is a reasonable expenditure of the taxpayer dollars.
He's right. That silent protest did consist of mostly middle-aged women linked arm in arm. And that second event, a mostly quiet gathering of middle-aged women and young people holding candles.
We sang "This Little Light of Mine" was about as rowdy as things got.
During the night of that candlelight vigil, when the SWAT team was hiding in the bushes here in front of the governor's mansion, 8 News has confirmed the governor and the First Lady weren't even home at the time. So it begs the question, who were police protecting?
I think it's a pretty unnecessary cost considering how peaceful all of the events were.
We wanted to know whose call was it to bring out the SWAT team and the K-9 units. So we contacted the governor's office. They tell us the governor doesn't control security here. Talk to Capitol Police. We spoke to Capitol Police. They tell us they don't dictate to state police what type of assistance to provide. They say whether they use a tactical team, SWAT team, K-9 units, that's all up to state police. But when we called state police, they said we just provide assistance. Talk to Capitol Police. It's a finger-pointing game that has our heads spinning. You can hear more about our discussions with police and lawmakers and learn how one delegate is fighting for answers tonight at 11 in part 2 of our investigation into the costs of securing women's rallies. Carrie O'Brien, 8 News.
If you have something for Carrie to look into, you can send her an email at carrieinvestigates@wric.com or look her up on Facebook. Tonight, we continue our investigation into the cost of security for several women's rights rallies that were held earlier this year.
At each of those events, protesters were met with heavy police presence. How much did it cost taxpayers?
8 News anchor Carrie O'Brien investigates.
a helicopter, the SWAT team, and an armored car. It's the kind of police presence you would expect to see at a standoff. But this is the state's response to 3 rallies for women's rights held around the Capitol earlier this year.
I felt like I was in Platoon or something. They had like commandos in the bushes.
One of those rallies was a silent protest, the other a candlelight vigil. And then there was this rally, when police arrested more than 30 protesters for sitting on the Capitol steps.
There was no violence.
At a time when the state is strapped for cash, 8 News wanted to know, what's the price tag for all this extra security? What did it cost you, the taxpayer? Records we obtained from state police show the cost of overtime and comp time for the officers came to nearly $30,000.
It'd be great if that $30,000 could have went to pay for some more teachers, for some more programs in our schools to help with education.
I think it's a pretty unnecessary cost considering how peaceful all of the events were.
We wanted to know whose call was it to bring out the SWAT team and the K-9 units, so we contacted the governor's office. They tell us the governor doesn't control security here. Talk to Capitol Police. We spoke to Capitol Police. They tell us they don't dictate to state police what type of assistance to provide. They say whether they use a tactical team, SWAT team, K-9 units, that's all up to state police. But when we called state police, they said we just provide assistance. Talk to Capitol Police. It's a finger-pointing game that has our heads spinning. While no one would own up to the decision to call out the SWAT team and other tactical units, state police did issue this statement. The deployment of state police resources to a demonstration anywhere within the Commonwealth is dictated by the time, location, and anticipated crowd size of the event or gathering. It is the responsibility of our department to maintain peace and order at such an event. No one with state police, Capitol Police, or the governor's office would comment on the amount of money spent. But State Delegate David Toscano had plenty to say.
It didn't seem to me to be that kind of troublesome demonstration, and to spend that kind of money and that excessive show of force seems a little bit much in light of the circumstances.
The delegate has been highly critical of the scene on the Capitol steps when 36 protesters were arrested. While protests are permitted on Capitol grounds, they're banned from the Capitol steps. Toscano fired off this letter to the Capitol Police Chief, calling the images of armed state police in full riot gear removing Virginia citizens troubling.
Our discussions are ongoing with the Capitol Police to determine what kinds of protocols they have in place to protect citizens, but and yet give them the right to protest.
The delegate questions why the Capitol steps are off limits to protesters in the first place. After all, the Capitol belongs to the people of Virginia.
We understand that the prohibition against demonstrating on the steps has been in place since the 70s, but we don't know what the constitutional basis is for that, and we're going to try to find out some more in the upcoming weeks and months.
Carrie O'Brien, 8 News.
If you have something you would like Carrie to investigate, you can send an email to carrieinvestigates@wric.com.